Well, hello guys. I'm actually not making this video in the morning. It's the afternoon, and I've already put my pajamas on, so I am not going to have my video face on here. You can't see me, but you can hear me. How great. This is a lecture, it's really short, on ecological resources, and this is to help you with lesson 2 for Science 112, Chihuahuan Desert Critters. And let's go ahead and get started on it. Okay, so in order to talk about a resource, we need to define it. So here's the definition, and you guys are going to take notes on this, then you're going to take a picture of your notes when you're done, and you're just going to upload it into the document. So make sure you're writing things down as we go. Plus, I don't have the definition on the screen, you have to write it down. So the definition of resource is a thing an organism needs to survive. A thing an organism needs to survive. And usually I don't like using the word thing in science because it's too general and you can usually be more specific. But in this case, thing is the only good word because sometimes it's like a physical thing like food that you need to put in your body. But sometimes a resource is a mate, and that's a lot more complicated to find a mate than just finding food. If you're a human, you have to get somebody that's willing to, reproduce with you. And so that's a lot more complicated than just finding food. So thing is a good word because sometimes, like in the case of humans, it's relationships that you're trying to find. I put this picture here in the corner of Indian food, you guys. I've been obsessed with Indian food lately. I went to India Hut in Las Cruces, I guess it was 4 weeks ago. And since then, I can't stop eating it because I am I'm 95% vegetarian. I eat meat, but I will choose non-meat over meat anytime. And a lot of Indian food is vegetarian. So it's like oh my gosh, it's like the sauce is made of vegetables. They put a lot of time into cooking all of their vegetables, and I just think it's delicious. So that's what I think of as a resource right away, like food. But in ecology, we're going to be looking at resources that you might not necessarily think of right away. Water, you probably thought of right away, but you might not have thought of nitrogen or reproductive partners, the amount of sunlight, and if you're a plant, you need sunlight. So we're going to look at these other resources in a lot more detail because space for living, you already know that, right? You need shelter if you're a person. You don't need shelter if you're a plant. And that's why this other topic comes in called tolerances. Tolerances are things that an organism can put up with. So in the desert, you have to be able to tolerate drought. You have to be able to live without a lot of water available. But if we didn't have a lot of sunlight, if for some reason, I don't know, let's just say there's a volcano and it has a lot of ashes that go into the atmosphere and it reduces the sunlight by 10% across the whole world, plants would freak out because they don't have enough sunlight. So that even though that's a tolerance, the amount of light they get, that would also be considered a resource. I put pH on here because this is a topic that shows up in science over and over again. pH is technically it's the measurement of how many hydrogen ions, they're called hydroxide ions, are in a substance. So if it doesn't have very many hydroxide ions, or if it does, it's going to behave differently. So we measure pH in a scale of basically 0 to 14. The closer it is to 0, the more acidic it is. The closer to 14, the more alkaline it is. Another word for alkaline is basic. And if it's 7, then it's neutral. That's right in the middle, like water is neutral. And some organisms really need a slightly acidic pH to survive. A lot of bacteria do not like acid at all. So your skin is actually slightly acidic because your skin makes chemicals to be slightly acidic so that bacteria can't survive. They don't have a tolerance to live on your skin. So then a resource, they can't find resources on your arm because you make your arm too acidic for them to survive there. So tolerances and resources are really related, and we're going to talk about both. Salinity refers to how much salt is in a liquid or in a substance. So if you have an ocean fish, it needs salinity, But if you have a freshwater fish and you put it in salt water, it'll die because it doesn't have a tolerance to survive there. Let's keep going. Okay, competition is really, really big for resources. So there aren't very many resources. Well, I mean, there are resources, but there's not like an unlimited amount. So infinite in this case would be like never-ending resources. Humans don't have never-ending resources on this planet, so we have to be really careful about what parts of the earth we are destroying to get resources for ourselves, because we're basically destroying the planet. Animals, when they don't have enough like skills for competition, they're not good enough to compete for resources, they just die off. Human beings, because we're a different kind of animal than the rest, we just exploit our resources and make them available for ourselves. A lot of sci-fi topics even, or a lot of sci-fi shows even have humans like going to other planets or other galaxies to get resources for ourselves. In nature, if things can't get resources, they're not good at competition, they just die off. So related to competition, we have adaptations and fitness. These are two terms that we use a lot in an evolution class, which you should have already taken before this one. And adaptations are things like features, traits that make an organism more able to survive and reproduce or compete in a certain ecosystem. And their overall ability to compete is called fitness. How well are they able to survive and reproduce? So here I've taken the kangaroo rat as an example because we have kangaroo rats in our Chihuahuan desert and they are fabulous creatures. Okay, so here it's talking about their camouflage with their coloring. It's talking about how it can jump really far. And it also talks about how being able to jump so far helps them to escape predators. I think they can jump like, I don't want to say this because I feel like it could be wrong, but they can jump like 3 meters, which is kind of like just a little bit shy of 9 feet. So in one jump, they can just totally escape a snake or whatever. So that's pretty cool. The coolest thing, in my opinion, about kangaroo rats is that they can make their own water from their food. So kangaroo rats have a diet that includes a lot of carbohydrates. And if you listen to the name carbohydrate, carbo, which is going to be carbon, the element carbon, and then hydrate, which is going to be like water, so it's like H2O. So basically, kangaroo rats have built their digestive system so that they can actually get most of the water they need, not from having to go find water, but because they just rearrange the molecules and carbohydrates into water inside their body. Humans can do this too, but we can only like make 11% of the water we need, so we still have to drink a lot of water. But the kangaroo rat has really like honed in on that system, and over many generations it has an adaptation that makes it able to survive basically without ever drinking water. Even though it has to use water in its life, it just makes its own. That's pretty amazing. That makes it pretty fit. All of these things that the kangaroo rat has make it really fit for living in this desert. It's really good at competing for resources in the desert. But if we took it to another place like the rainforest, I feel like the kangaroo rat would be really confused, and it's not fit for that kind of place. Here's a plant that I recently found out is cooler than I thought it was. So this plant is called an ocotillo. I have some of these in my front yard at my house. These are all over town. You can see them all the time. And mine were not producing any leaves. So usually they have like these little leaves in the summertime on them and they fall off in the wintertime. But mine didn't have any leaves, and so I was really concerned that they were dying. But then I read up on the ocotillo, and it has an adaptation that it doesn't even need leaves to do photosynthesis. It has enough pigment in its skin, and since we have so much sunlight here in the desert, it can actually just get enough sun on its I guess like we would call these branches on these long stems. It can do photosynthesis without even having leaves. So that's pretty cool. And that makes it fit to live in this environment, because in the desert, there's unlimited amounts of sun. So you don't have to put out a whole bunch of leaves in order to get a bunch of sunlight. Okay, one more thing you need to know about resources is that there's usually a limiting resource, and sometimes they call it the limiting nutrient. The limiting nutrient, here's what you write down as the definition, is the nutrient or the resource that runs out first. So it's the one that everything is competing for the most. Here in the desert, you would probably guess, guess right now, just guess. What is the limiting resource in the desert? Yeah, it's water, right? We have tons of sunlight. So we have tons of sunlight, but we don't have a lot of water. So we have these plants that are like really far spread out from each other because there's not enough water for us to have a high density of plants. But if you look, they don't have really like dark green colors. There's not a whole bunch of huge leaves on these plants because there is not limiting sunlight, right? There's a lot of sunlight for these plants to gather up. If we went to the rainforest instead, the rainforest has like a ton of rain. They get rain every single day all year long. There's no seasons. It is warm and rainy every day. And so instead of having plants that are like spread out like this in the desert, they have like a gajillion plants because there's just an unlimited amount of water. But what happens in the rainforest is they run out of other nutrients. Like there's not enough nitrogen for plants to do things that they need with nitrogen, which include photosynthesis. And so what ends up happening here is that we have these layers of plants and they all have different ways of getting enough sunlight. So there's a really high density of plants. They're like all over the place, just growing literally on top of each other. And and at the bottom of the rainforest, you don't have like as many plants that are growing down here because there's just not as much sunlight. So a lot of the plant life down here comes from things that are falling from up in the canopy. Of course, if it's not a really dense rainforest like this, then you do get sunlight like peering through. But they have to compete for sunlight. And in the desert, that isn't the case. They're competing for water. So depending on where you are, depending on the system that you're studying, you're going to have a lot of different resources that end up being the limiting resource. All right, that's all for this one. So go ahead and make sure you take a picture of your notes and upload it so you can get your points.